happy I can introduce to you the lecture, What is Feminism in Research and Art by Katja Kobolt. And I'm happy that we have her as a guest in our program for the first time, and also to welcome her for the first time also visiting Kosovo. The opportunity came in the last moment as we were discussing with Jelena, and it worked out fine in the end. I'm also happy that we'll have Jelena to discuss after the presentation. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm just going to read briefly a summary, which is also available here in the space. It starts like this. When one says feminism in emancipatory political dimension seems obvious. However, how does it stand with feminism in contemporary condition of liberal proliferation of feminism into feminisms? In the last 3 to 2 decades, the post-socialist decades, so-called feminist art, but also research production, was deterritorialized, or rather reterritorialized, by the globalized systems, which have been, like all spheres of life, deeply immersed in the internalized modes of capitalist production, and also in various exercised identity violence. Thus, the simple question, how to research and curate, or how live and act in feminist terms, has returned with renewed urgency. Katja Kobolt is a scholar and curator who has been engaged with feminist research and curating various feminist and post-migrant initiatives in Europe, historically referred to as Central Europe, and later fragmented into Western and Southeastern Europe. She proposes to view the urgencies of feminist curating today through the historical lens of art's relational position in the project called Modernity. Tied to the fundamental characteristic of modernity as res publica, modernity over spaces, market and form, for the new kind of public, the masses, and thus art, like other social spheres of reproduction, of representation, was again inevitably linked to the question of power and governance. I will not read more because you have again materials in this space. I can just say Jelena runs course 12, part of the program this year. Her bio is also in this space. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction and of course a kind invitation. I'm very happy to be with you tonight, and thank you all for coming. Since years I have heard the summer school by Vesić has been opening up most needed space for engaged critical debates, and I'm happy to finally be here also at summer school and in Kosovo. And even though it was, as Albert already said, a very last-minute arrangement, and I'm a bit tired from the travels, I hope we'll come into discussion about the topics that I'm going to raise. In times when traveling in this region became almost a continental experience, events like summer school could not be overvalued. Also because the summer school has always offered also space for feminist voices. Also this year with Susanna Milewska. And as the title of my talk today, as well as the kind introduction by Albert suggests, I continue the feminist strand. I particularly depart from global post-socialist condition. Do you hear me well, or should I speak loudly or something? Okay? Okay. So I particularly depart from post-socialist condition, which has offered us a liberal proliferation of feminism into feminisms, and this pluralization in itself has already urged for the search for the political. The divided field and relativist perspectives have been within the institutional framework, and this also in terms of art production and also knowledge production, translated mostly into different liberal mechanisms of gender mainstreaming, to some extent also diversity discourses, post-feminist and post-colonial consumption, while institutions and as such then also the institution of art and knowledge production and the rules of the game within these institutions stays for the most untouched. In the last 2 decades, the so-called feminist art, but also research production and knowledge production was reterritorialized by the globalized epistemic system, which has been, like all spheres of life, as Albert already quoted my proposal, immersed in internalized modes of capitalist productions, which kind of immerse the subjectivity and also in variously exercise identity violence and I would say first class violence. Thus, like the red thread of my talk today, and also of my activity and reflections, stay how to research and produce and how to live and act in feminist terms today. And in regard to the term post-socialism, I would like to underline some people even use the term post-socialism and so forth, but like the global dimension of this condition is, I think, very important to see. So post-socialism as a crown optics on the post-Cold War condition, and it's not relating only to the spaces with previously existing socialism, but to the, so to say, the whole world abandoned by mass socialist movements. And from history of art and art institutions, we know that moments like French Revolution, the communist and anti-colonial revolutions, student revolts, democratization movements, and some strange way also post-socialist shifts, that such historical situations faced especially art, but also other areas of creativity, of creative expression and innovation, as well as their institutions with questions in regard their accessibility for the masses. In most of the named historical situations, the art masses proliferated in terms of gender, in terms of race, ethnicity, partly also class and age. But this extended accessibility made also these institutions and thus also arts and a relational position in regard to power and governance more complex, like the crucial question how to control the masses. So, in my proposal today, to look at some of the urgencies of feminist production today, especially in the fields of research and art, where I'm also active in, I will focus mostly on arts and also knowledge production's relational position to power and governance. I'm mostly interested in 3 aspects, which are how the power of representative is perpetuated in production conditions, what is a feminist intervention in this production, and also what are the limits of such intervention. And of course, this proposal of mine and the optics are deeply situated. I will particularly discuss 2 feminist initiatives that I have been a part of and report also on fractures that we have experienced. The first initiative, and maybe at this point I just take you over, maybe Albert, you would be so kind and come if you're not recording. side. There are also a couple of contributions of some people present here today. So the first initiative I want to focus on is the Trans-Yugoslav Feminist Curatorial Collective, Red Mind, which we have initiated together with Jelena and with colleagues Daniela Dugancic and Inge Kuparec. In the 2010s, the collective Red Mind, all of us coming from different post-Yugoslav contexts and living in different cities, work together with mainly, but not exclusively, post-Yugoslav individuals, initiatives and institutions, among others also with Jelena and Vesić, to jointly create a different commonality within the coded space exhibition. I want to particularly focus on one edition of our long-term interactive exhibition series, Living Archive, which, due to the representativeness of the event the edition was embedded in, which was October Salon in Belgrade, made visible not only the continuous uncanniness or even rejection of feminism by post-Yugoslav masculinized left discourses. As Jelena Petrovic commented, feminism is only acceptable if its demands are directed towards outside, towards neoliberal economies of the new class society, and not towards the internal problems of male dominance in this universal left perspective. The 24th October Salon edition in 2013 in Belgrade also made obvious that the post-Yugoslav struggles around feminist art and knowledge production as politically and socially engaged practices are in some strange way reenacting in a certain way almost a century-old conflict on the artistic left. Before I turn to what I consider this certain reactivation of this historical conflict, let me first present a bit what the collective Red Mind worked upon and how, especially the methods that the Red Mind worked with, play also a role in the follow-up, self-organized initiative, Nels Facts and Fictions, I have been a part of later on, and that I also want to discuss in the concluding part of my talk today. As a collective Red Mind, we have departed from the post-Yugoslav production context, which had, after the violent dissolution of the socialist federal state and introduction of capitalism and neoliberal politics, in regard to the art but also knowledge production, experienced fragmentation within the general ethno-nationalization, repatriarchalization, weakening of the institutions on the one hand, and on the other, professionalization in terms of entrepreneurship and semi or new institutionalization like NGOs, as well the centralization of funding. I think this is very important as money as power, and the historical production condition was indeed more pluralistic in terms of funding sources. And last but not least, all of these both fields experience precarization. In addition, as some authors note, the art production as well as art historical discourses and the histories of feminism and Yugoslav history in itself experienced the general rescripting or reterritorialization within the process of the so-called global, or rather still Western reception, and this of course influences also the way we produce today. Therefore, Redline wanted to work differently and thus base the materiality of our work on the intervention into our everyday, into our material reproduction. While we work, we produce, we need also to reproduce the conditions of our production, and this was the point of entry, or this was the point when we mainly wanted to intervene also with the Living Archive editions. We wanted to intervene within the structures of the coded space exhibition and the way we produce and reproduce it. And we have developed different tools, a set of so-called non-working stations. This method allowed an archive actually to live and to generate an interactive space. The elements we used, you could read here in the presentation yourself. I would say by today such a structure, or at least some of the elements we used, are kind of more or less standard exhibition structure today, but then definitely not at that time. With the Belgrade edition of the Living Archive, which took place as the 54th October Salon, which is the central contemporary art manifestation in the peripheralized and pauperized Serbian, but also regional post-Yugoslav contemporary art context. We have under the title Nobody Belongs Here More Than You, which is a reference to a novel by Miranda July. In particular, wanted to underline the intimate, social, planetary, non- and post-human imagination towards possible futures and its responsible politics of commons and commonalities. On the case of one of the reviews of the Belgrade Living Archive edition by the colleagues from the Zagreb-based curatorial collective blog, Ivana Hanacek and Anna Kutlesha, I will further outline some of the fractures, not only feminist production, but also feminism in general in post-Yugoslav space experiences. And in particular, I want to outline the trajectory of these critiques along the historical struggle on the artistic left. What I mean when I say the conflict on the artistic left. As I guess you know from history of the revolutionary 20th century, and in particular from the history of art following the Soviet Revolution, global revolutionaries of the mid-war period fought over appropriate new revolutionary forms, which would indeed lead to emancipation. At stake in the realm of culture, artistic and intellectual production was not only their autonomy, but pax pro tutto, the freedom also in and of other realms of life. The fight over the question, what is freedom and how could it be achieved, was also articulated on the level of the so-called artistic formation. On the one side, there was, so let's go back. So on the one side, there was the historical avant-garde, with the freedom or the autonomy. In Yugoslav case particularly, it's surrealist, constructivist, or Zenitist articulations, or as Miroslav Karleža said, l'art. And on the other, the educative tendency of socialist realism. In socialist Yugoslavia, next to the caesura of the Second World experiences, it was a conflict on the artistic left, in and out of which the post-war discourses on art, culture, and knowledge production evolved. In antagonism to the Soviet model, which especially in the 1930s took an authoritarian path, the Yugoslav model underlined the free, now I'm quoting, free creative activity for the universal treasury of progress and culture. These were the words by the constructor of the principles of Yugoslav self-management, Edvard Kardelj, and the rejection of all programmatic bottom-down intervention. In the vision of Kardelj, but also of Miroslav Krleža, as another prominent figure of the Yugoslav conflict on the artistic left, now I'm quoting, for the development of socialism and socialist democracy and the development of socialist forms, the autonomy of cognition and art on the one hand, and their situatedness or partinos in the context of material living conditions on the other were preconditions. Only on the ground of autonomous production, I quote, when artists who with their gift, their knowledge and their taste will be able to subjectively reflect these objective motives of our life reality, our own art will be born. The words by Miroslav Krleža. So from the conflict, the historical conflict on the artistic left, which was at least nominally in the beginning of the 50s, culturally, politically overcome, back to the critical response towards the Living Archive edition at October Salon, as I said, authored by Ivana Hanacek and Anna Kutleša. As you see, the authors forged the title of their review back-to-back to the exhibition title. No one belongs here more than Scepter. Now, what Scepter, not as a royal object, obviously, is doing here. Scepter is a Serbian multinational enterprise extending their direct selling of products, of cookware and other home and health accessories, also to private art collections and also private art institutions. And why is Scepter of relevance here? In June 2013, when the Red Mind, over an open call, got appointed as the curators of that year's October Salon to open, as the title suggests, already in autumn. The Red Mind searched for a public museum or a gallery in Belgrade that would be big enough to host over 40 artistic positions, have at its disposal an operating license to be able to welcome public, be open and available in autumn, and have heating and electricity in the whole building. And we found none. A situation familiar also in some of the other post-Yugoslav contexts. Meanwhile, in one of the most prominent central locations in Belgrade, the huge former textile department store and the factory, originally built as an Art Deco military salon, and now in private hands of one of the most powerful families in Serbia, Cepter, was standing empty. The search for space went on until July, when then, with a lump in our throats, together with the producer, host of the event, a Belgrade City Cultural Institution, we realized that we faced one of two possibilities. Either the October Salon to open end of September would not take place at all, or the public event would have to go into a private space. So besides beating on the national, regional, local breasts, the event anyway implies, the event would also be misappropriated into becoming a promotion of public-private partnership. In any case, we're talking about the translation of cultural capital. In addition, local real estate owners, the Cepter, decided to launch in the space during the opening days of the exhibition a public auction of their mostly collection, thus already predefining the space for us which we could enter and not enter. In terms of the display, the exhibition was thus substantially visually and also spatially interrupted, and as curators we decided not to mask or frame this interruption and thereby neutralize the visual as well as productive intrusion of this material interruption into the exhibition. The break of the real, the reality of capitalism, broke uncommented into the visual and spatial display, and as such it aroused uncanny effects, as the real usually does. Indeed, these uncanny effects, having its roots in the outside, in what is referred to as life, could be entitled Nobody Belongs Here More Than Sekte. In the review, Hanacek and Kutlesha further problematized the curatorial gesture of political community. Political community in terms of acknowledgement that the desired intervention into the production context, situated within the broader ossified institutional, patriarchal, and exploitative context, is of course limited. Hanacek and Kutlesha also missed the central perspective of and on feminism, claiming that the actors, now I quote, that the actors in the field of engaged artistic practices must first agree among themselves what a feminist struggle through art today should be, and only then come out among the wider strata. Quote end. In continuation, the authors list what representations of mostly women's lives they were missing, and hugely repeating kind of a disciplined form of feminized, of feminism, and the desired deterritorialization of artistic practices into a proper artistic political articulation under the terms of the commodified feminism, meaning that what is already consumed as feminist to be repeated on the agenda and in the agenda of the exhibition. I quote, "It is therefore surprising that the underrepresentation of feminist themes from the point of view of male artists. Thus, the exhibition as a whole, although containing several very interesting works, seems to present the work of women around the world at any level of political articulation." So what was here at stake was, in my eyes, a certain repetition of the main features of the conflict on the artistic left, which is the question of art's autonomy. And this question exists, obviously, art, and it has to do with subjects and objects, not only of art. What are good curators, what are good artists, what is good art, what is bad art, but what is feminism and for whom is feminism for? Here has Redmind indeed insisted that feminism should be a safe and common ground for all, that feminism is politics of solidarity and equality, and also all different Redmind methodologies bear witness to the main qualities of feminist curating, which is that feminist producers, feminist curators, artists, and the public, we're not agents, we are producers. Or Boyna Page also once said very nicely, feminist curating is not a method. It's not a theme, it's a method. And from this I want to move over to the concluding part of my talk today, in which I tend to reflect on the limits of such collective curatorial interventions into production materiality. In particular, I want to turn to the question of the relation that between the subjects and objects of both art, curating, and feminism. These I will problematize on the ground of another, so to say, self-case study, the NES Hex, Facts and Fictions platform, within which we have since the 2018 worked with similar methods as the Red Mind, on the initiative of the curator, educator and activist Ayşe Güleç, curator Suza Huse and myself. The platform brought together artists, curators, activists, students, researchers and beauty workers to collaboratively explore various aspects of the material culture of cosmetics, embedded in care practices and feminized beauty work. Against the backdrop of the feminization of both beauty and artistic labor and the prevalence of precarity in both sectors, I want particularly to turn to the question of correct curatorial collective modes of production as important forms of resistance against this precarity. The NES Hex, Facts, Fictions address the precariat in two ways. The platform produced and researched works, and it also developed presentation formats for the visibility and consideration of the precarity of beauty work, from the temporal, spatial, and material conditions in the feminized and migranticized beauty sector, to the normativity of beauty work as a prerequisite for feminized subjects to enter the so-called productive labor. Meaning that, as you know, especially for feminized subjects, there are quite exact codes how one needs to look like in a specific sector. On the other hand, the platform actively reflected on its own precarious situatedness. Artistic work in the heteronomy of precarious and exploitative conditions has been discussed from different angles by different researchers in recent years. Many authors, and who's also today present, Jelena, Vesić, consider the alienation of artistic work and by extension other immaterial labor, such as research and artistic work, from labor as the core of the ideological base on which the re-articulation of intersectional differences and thus the mechanisms of exploitations and accumulation of the surplus value rest. So these are interconnected processes. Anthony Ives and Marina Wischmidt state in their text, make whichever you find work, for the so-called post-feminist immaterial labor and alienation and formal commonality with other kinds of effective labor, I quote, as art expands to include more and more fields of social action within its imaginative and institutional remit, political activity, work, education, the paradox remains that the social effectiveness of art is guaranteed by its separation from capitalist work, whose art's estrangement from labor continues apace. But at this historical juncture coincides with labor's estrangement from labor, laboring subjects who do not identify with themselves as labor, meaning I love my work, yeah? I live my work, life becomes work. On the other hand, all labor becomes in some sense aesthetic self-creation. On the other, formally unalienated forms of activity are subsumed by capitalist social relations on an unprecedented scale. All this poses the contradiction that rather than heralding communism, the enactment of micro-utopian experiments in in spaces over-determined by existing social relations dominated by abstract value, and this is coded space exhibition par excellence. So that so these micro experiments and micro interventions, they do not show how close, but how far are we from the emergence of truly emancipatory practices. Eis and Wischmidt articulate the paradox that to some degree is also inherent to the micro-utopian Vesić and fictions platform and also the activities of the Red Mind. The producers gathered in both collectives, Red Mind and Vesić Facts and Fictions, were, as a rule, all self-employed and based in different Central or Southeast European cities, attached to usually feminist, queer, migrant, or post-colonial and non- or semi-institutional contexts, and we were all searching for or replying institutional invitations. By anchoring the joint production in different semi- and institutional frameworks and networks, a kind of decentralized, non-institutional, star-shaped, and situated production base was enabled. For example, a Berlin-based curator, Susan Husse, opened up and shared her assistant position at the Berlin Universität der Künste in class Monica Bonvicini, and in a joint seminar and final exhibitions, art students, artists, activists, and researchers started the research into beauty labor. Also various understandings and articulations of beauty, as well as spaces, practices, materialities, and discourses connected cosmetics with a cross-sectional approach. An important practicized method within the platform was continuous collective work. Collective work on the same artistic position, or positions rather, over a longer period of time, to be presented as work in progress at various Vesić and Fictions editions. In these ways, resources, time, space, and money, which were always sparse anyway, reduced not only spent to prolong the production time, but also to improve and deepen the exchange, the relations within the group, and share work, something that is usually missing in the production process, where exclusivity and often overproduction are the tellers of overwork. The curatorial structure for the presentations of the platform was also agreed to allow the members to participate in various aspects of the research and production process, thus opening up the production towards collective authorship, and thus also improving quite practically the fees in the budget, Excel spreadsheets. This also entitled each member of the collective to initiate further projects. Thus, the star-shaped strategy, which was similar as the Red Mind production materiality, it has resisted material, institutional, and productive precarity by sharing the means, but only to a certain extent. The fact that all members joined or left the platform according to their resources and interests, that the distributive works as the publications were produced collectively and thus owned by all, that the presentation formats were developed through a collective dialogue, also significantly expanded the methods of authorship. However, while on the one hand, the star-shaped and temporarily situated curatorial production makes the production situation possible at all. Make whichever you can't work, hashtag. And the collective dimension did mitigate the precarious working conditions of the participating artists, underlying artists, to a certain extent. On the other hand, the estrangement from labor continued apace. This was partly addressed in some internal but also public problematizations of both collectives. Despite the different articulations, what was most critically addressed was the discomfort of both collectives with external and sometimes even internal expectations regarding the possible political organization of the assumed subjects and objects of the collectives. In the case of the Red Mind, feminists, and in broader sense, women. And in the case of the Net Facts and Fictions platform, these were precarious beauty workers, and in broader sense, also more or less all women who practice everyday beauty activities. Within the Net Facts and Fictions, and on some occasions, beauty workers did participate in the platform's research and production process as teachers, interviewers, facilitators, or even co-authors. The platform also organized a public fundraising campaign when one of the beauty workers faced eviction now in the pandemic, being unable to work. Even if the members of the platform were not united in their ambitions, some of them inspired to an active role for the platform, for the political organization of the precarious beauty workers, while the others doubted its legitimacy and ability to do so. It must be noted that through its work, the platform rather re-articulated existing social differences and remained embedded in capitalist production. Why so? It is beholden on Marxist feminists to understand not only how the construction of difference has been used to legitimize exploitation, particularly in social reproduction, but also how crucial the specific organization of social reproduction is to the functioning of capitalism or something other than capitalism. Unpaid or badly paid social reproductive activity is central to the functioning of capitalism. Thereon is based the accumulation of the surplus value. So starting from the materialist thesis that the logic of capitalist production and commodification subsumes all difference under the aegis of general equivalence, money, in order to extract surplus value, capitalism must pre-produce, re-articulate, and reinvent the difference. Therefore, central for intersectional differences are the question of the subject's positionality in and towards social reproduction activity and of the abstract value of this activity. And in the remaining condition, the abstract value of the research, artistic work is in favor of the artists and not of the beauty workers and the beauty work, obviously. So, to conclude, as a micro-utopian experiment, the Net Facts and Fictions collective curatorial modes, and also Red Minds, intervened partially into production materiality and the existing social relations and abstract value, but mainly on the relation between curators, artists, researchers, and other intellectual workers. However, the abstract value persisted in favor of us, immaterial workers, as opposed to the subject of other research and work, beauty workers, and feminized subjects in general. Some of the aforementioned invitations to beauty workers to join the platform's activities intervened to some degree in these ossified social differences. However, in the dilemma of who are we to organize the workers and who will organize the workers if not us, the platform basically ended up mostly sticking to what is usually associated with research and artistic work about beauty work and beauty workers. Coming back to the introductory question of power and governance, or how to control masses, my conclusion would be that the power of representative is perpetuated in the abstract value of an activity. Thus, feminist curating and feminist production can intervene mostly on the level where the abstract value of activities kind of equals. The limits of such intervention are that art's estrangement from labor continues, and thus also the reproduction of social differences. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Katja. First, let's dedicate this discussion, at least of two of us, to Polish artist Natalia Jelena, who dealt a lot in the early 70s with beauty labor and with the representation of women in that context, and who died these days in her 85th year, which I wish to all of us to reach in this maybe the more dramatic conditions of living with acceleration of capitalism, and with also you know, like this extreme inhalation of everything that is done into what's part of our enemies and not friends, but part of what we don't want in the future and not what we want in the future. So thank you for this lecture where you, I think, critically and self-critically presented the advantages and limitations of the two very important international feminist curatorial and artistic groups where you worked. One being Red Mind Collective, which has this very interesting name, like red. It can be red mind, like in sense of thinking, red thinking, and it is because E is in the brackets, so it is also a mind, a diversion, and this is one of my favorite names for the web. And secondly, male project, which was international, which was taking place a lot in Germany, but which was, as far as I know, also started before this lecture, including a lot of, aside from, you know, like discussion of labor and discussion of feminine, or maybe precisely part of it, the colonial relationships and hierarchies between the Balkans and the Europe. And this is also one of the borders in, now if I reduce it to like characteristics of the South, the Balkan, and maybe more structural healthy life, which is somehow like more deep, and which is not so maybe present in the surface characteristic for West, and specifically Germany, and maybe the area of Munich, this southern Germany, that has this long tradition of health maintenance and like long life expectancy. So my first question to you would be to maybe reflect more on this colonial, basically, but also gender-related aspect of the project, because the main project, as I understood, includes a lot of migrant labor as well.
Yeah, thank you. Very relevant kind of impulse to articulate basically the starting points in a way of the project. So I named before Aisha Vesić and Susan Huse, with whom we were sitting at the previous documenta at the kitchen table, and I was just working on an exhibition which would encounter 50 years of the so-called Gastarbeiter agreement, which was the last agreement for foreign workers Germany made with the country, which was a very orchestrated migration as opposed to today. It was a very selective migration also, so like the thing was that the migration, it's basically this agreement already gave administrative and political framework on the migrations that were happening anyway. So basically the impulse of Yugoslavia was to, on the one hand, try to assure more social rights for the migrant workers, in this specific case Germany, and for Germany it was to control better who is coming. So they were basically employing health checks for people, so like the companies sent doctors checking out if women were not pregnant, how is the dental state, so only healthy and young people could go. So here already we have this health dimension on the one hand. On the other hand, after the Gastarbeiter stop, which came very soon afterwards, 74, which I think it's also something that very much influenced the development of Yugoslavia afterwards, the global oil crisis and so forth. This kind of liberalization, I mean, the migration stopped, which pushed again the migrants into more precarious condition. So departing from this, from myself, we were talking with Aisha Vesić, who is a migrant, anti-racist activist, also a curator at the present Documenta, also responsible for much of the works at Documenta right now, and she was researching already the phenomena of German agency for work, who obviously kind of installed a racial profiled program to especially targeted Asian women of Asian origin to visit free course for manicure. The condition was that after the course they would become entrepreneurs, like self-employed, and go into a very precarious, like you must know that, for example, in Berlin, artificial nails, which is a process of 1.5 hours approximately, with all the material, all the machines, the rent, the labor, the chemicals which are immensely hazardous for health. That this costs like 25-30 euros, and this should, like cover everything. So we kind of like departed from there, and also experienced ourselves that the migrant and post-migrant situatedness in the German context also applied kind of expectation of a certain look, which is something that also some, especially young artists from with migration background, I think very nicely work with within their artistic subjectivity. So basically this was then the point of entry into this, and I would say with that, because you targeted very much with your question this dichotomy between health and cosmetic. As cosmetics, something as repairing or retouching an injured, corrupted body by bad living and working conditions, the body that breaks under these fractures of body art conditions in a way, and a healthy body in decent working conditions, in decent health, and also time and space kind of trajectories, and this, really somehow made me also thought, also colleagues of mine in Germany, Julian Warner, I think, texted to Kunst, it was, they also kind of, within the current post-socialist Germany, this is what I also underlined in the beginning, within the current post-socialist German condition, also the relation towards body and sport, which was in the socialist context much more not only accessible, but basically really structured and really implemented, from the school. Just as an anecdote, Slovenia, because in socialism, since schooling of children, they had sport cards, in which it was documented how the sport activity and the health condition of students were developing, and this continued. And Slovenia was the first one to digitalize these statistics, which makes Slovenia extremely popular for all the European projects because they want to grab on this long-term view. But yes, cosmetics is certainly something that is very much related to this situatedness, which is in many times a precarious situatedness. Yeah. I hope that I somehow, because I was opening up so many things, but it was kind of very intuitive
No, this is no, the thing is that the very theme, the very problematic is so much layered between like health and beauty, between east and west or south and north, between this identity which we like in the region also somehow this identity of hyper beautification and artificialization of your body in the terms of cosmetics in the region. We also connected to turbo folk culture, which is in one hand like a peripheral cultural industry, so maybe not necessarily something like positive and emancipatory, but just a repetition of the model of the music industry. And then in another hand, it is part of this prosthesis that the people and especially women in the region are using to kind of cover their political and political disadvantages in front of employer, in front of the border, and so on. So yeah, this is also another layer of it. Can you tell us? I remember from our very informal conversations that we had during the time of when we were working intensely on Nails project. I remember that you told me, which I cannot repeat now, but I do remember that you told me like many interesting details. If you can now, like recall a few stories about this, kind of hologram nails. Can you just share and inform us about this curiosity of different curiosities of nail practice in terms of like aesthetic or art, or dedication, detail, miniature, and so on, okay? And in terms of toxicity.
Yes, I will try. So regarding this project, because we were also referring to the region, I guess it's very important kind of to acknowledge that like this binarity north-south, it's basically synchronicity in the north. So like within the north and within the south, like there are both present, the south and the north, because this is kind of class, it's defined like a class division, obviously, and this is then further proliferated into different identity parameters, and Germany is very keen of governance of its population through different categories. So like, this term migrational background, which makes in the administration a person's migrant background traceable for 3 generations. So it's really like, it's a whole oral history that, 3 generations you have immigration background, and then from the different categorizations, like when a child is born, they just define the geographical, racial origin of the child, like Eastern Europe or Asia. And I mean, it's so proliferated. But now to come to the nails and like from which angles together with the artist. We touch upon this material culture and also historical material connections, like for example, as you said, toxicity, like the origin of the nail polish is basically the car polish. It's more or less the same chemical structure, and these were also the same factories that were producing it, and this is the nitrocelluloses. Nitrocelluloses, also the base of the historical nitrocelluloid film. This is a research by and Kerstin Schuldiger in their video, and basically these were then like the pluralization of everything, like of the car culture as the vehicle of modernity, as opposed to the collective train, a Hitchcock train that brought revolution to the people, car being a vehicle of individual mobility, of patriarchal, nuclear family. This promotion went basically hand in hand. It was promoted on film, color film, car industry, and nail polish and cosmetics in general through the invention of color. And as a matter of fact, the situation is even more ethically distressed, because the color, the film color, the color film, for which Aqua Munich was, during the Second World War, 2 times awarded at the Venice Biennial, was developed by forced laborers, by forced workers, many of them coming from our region, who worked in complete darkness with like highly toxic chemicals. Like this is and then one can go on when then one goes, like I was, for example, I was researching basically how the promotion of kind of emancipated, manicured and cosmetically groomed womanhood was within the Yugoslav socialist condition, promoted hand in hand also with the independence in regard to the mobility and the promotion of car consumption in the Yugoslav situation, in which, for example, in Slovenia, like 90% of all of the mobility, is made by car. I mean, it's a huge ecological problem, also huge class division, and also age, and also gender division. So, I mean, it's once you kind of, scratch the color from the nail, it tells so much.
It opens the world. Yeah. Okay, maybe for the sake of the main thing, for the sake of the main thing that is part of your lecture, that is somehow like structurally radiating to all the details that you share with us, and all the projects that you were talking about, and it is what's in the core of it, it is of course this Vesić's critique of Marx, that is the absence of the absence actually is like blindness or non-reflection of the man's role of reproductive labor of care, effective labor in the process of capitalist installation, production of the surplus value, etc., etc. And this is also today very, very, very important for us in art, philosophy, etc. This of cognitive labor, which shares a lot of platform with the labor that was invisible and that only recently appeared to be a little bit visible, but not enough, because there is this unfulfilled request for the salaries for the labor of care and of children, the labor of taking care, and so on and so on. That's obviously somehow always induced through the so-called labor of love. So love, some kind of just love and not labor, and the research of mind that you also referred to in your lecture, which is related to artistic labor, carries the title the contracting of artistic jobs between love and money, between money and love, because there is this manipulation with the idea of love in both cases. So this is something that's immensely, tremendously important for us, reflecting upon our labor, and more than that, struggling for better conditions, because quite often, and I can tell this, the life of artists, or let's say cultural workers, or artists like in a broader sense, not institutionally, is not differing much, like in terms of payment, in terms of security, in terms of any kind of life stability from the labor of cosmetic workers. Okay, there are also privileges, and we cannot speak in the case of artistic labor about a homogeneous field. It is a class struggle in itself, and Gregory Cholet in his book about dark matter have written about this in details, that actually, as we see this like stars in the sky, so in order that the stars are visible, a lot of dark matter should be in between, and it is the same with the artistic and cultural star system. So in order to also in our context, okay, I made several detours and a lot of references, but in our context, in order to also avoid this like constant self-exhaustion and self-exploitation, I think it was enough of me. Okay, I had to give some comments and connect to Katja, but I would like to leave floor to you. Yesterday we had very good discussion, debate, a lot of questions connected to Susanna Minska's lecture, which is quite interesting. And maybe tonight we have a lot of questions, so I don't know. But I'm opening the floor to you, and I will jump only in case we are overpowered and therefore silent. Welcome.
I didn't
People are tired. Maybe we
Can I
can.
just
Well, first, thank you. I think it's really nice to bring the point of the name college that's really toxic and that we actually have this, that there is something toxic actually going on. And I think, yeah, maybe, yeah, why is there feminism? For me, it's, I don't know what everyone thinks, but for me, it's like there is really a lack of understanding or acknowledging that men and women, there exists both, the female and the male. And if we would kind of work towards this and understand ourselves a bit better, I think we would not be so toxic. We would not end up being so toxic. It goes for the female as well, because the female also maybe don't accept the male part, because so far we have been always, yeah, under control, I would say. But yeah, there is just really a lack of the balance of both sides.
Yes, thank you for your comment. This is a kind of a vision, a very Platonist vision, something that is kind of present in the consideration of these differences for a very long time. Within the project, we basically more or less departed more from the other perspective, which is that, you know, this idea of the void of the subject, which is then kind of through material, also material culture and relations, then filled with meaning and thus also difference, you know. So it's more kind of a different understanding, and also in not only understanding, this is also maybe a different goal, you know, really in terms of underlying equality. In these contexts, I think very important contributions were by the works by Anna Ehrenstein, who is Albanian origin artist, and she has followed the question of the production of fake and original, and this not only through the kind of outlining how so-called fakes are produced in terms of, you know, produced in the same factories by the same material, and then kind of performatively proclaimed for fakes, and Albania being one of the largest ports for the importation of these so-called fake goods that are then materially producing so-called fake humanity, you know, so it's not the normative humanity of the normatively looking, healthy, white, northwestern person, but it's a racialized, classicized, you know, peripheralized subjectivity. So I guess here, like her works, very kind of not illustrate, but more perform also like this general stance towards the question of identity and who's also gender identity within the collective.
Both the microphones are dead. Yeah.
This is something
just one question. If you could elaborate a little further on your conclusion that you gave at the very end concerning the first question that you asked, how to control the masses, where you mentioned the abstract value of activity. I'm not sure quite that I understood the whole, that you summarized. So if you could just elaborate a little bit.
Basically, to put it very bluntly, it's that through the specific normative regulation of the relations in production, we are controlled. So that this is that the organization of labor, the way how we work, is at the same time the instrument of governance. Of course, it's something that is not. It has been since the mid of 19th century. No, but what I mean is that this was nevertheless, I think that Engels already touched upon the problem of the family and of the reproduction labor. So when I say reproduction labor, or when we say reproduction labor, and it extends also artistic labor, it's all the labor that is dedicated to the reproduction of life, so we can be laboring subjects, like getting involved into so-called productive labor in the first place, so that we are healthy, that we are not tired, that we are, that our bellies are full, and so forth, and with an extension, art as a reproduction of meaning, of course, because there is no society without at least some shared meanings. But there are also other parallels to the reproduction work and artistic work, which is the continuous de-evaluation or like exclusivity within, so there is this, there are many, I think, tools as how for the reproduction of this, one of them also this genius.
It's either hyper-valued, overvalued, or undervalued.
Yes, and also I think that for most part, even now through this gender mainstreaming, gender, it's maybe less of a category, but still, like there are very little really research done, or seldom research, like the gender bias. I mean, it has been within the art sector, so like directors, companists, and feminized workers are, I mean, the dark matter is very feminized. That's what Gregory Cholet calls the dark matter. So like these invisible workers behind. So yes, but now to come back to your question and try to kind of summarize again, like the main point of the failure, or what I consider a failure, is then we could not break. This was the historical avant-garde, and what, for example, also in socialist Yugoslavia was promoted with the promotion of the so-called amateurism. So basically amateurism. So like, I mentioned this professionalism, and I think that the position towards the authorship, within the current professionalized structure and the way the whole production is organized, I mean, how we artists, how the artists are produced by the academies, by the whole art system, by the whole knowledge production, you know, it's very much different than it was before, for example, you know, which is something like when the academy opened in Pristina, you know, like it was the 70s, you know. Does this mean that there was no art before in this context? So, like, you know, the whole relation towards how the art is produced changed so much, and it's so much loaded with this pre-existed abstract value. So what I do, you know, it's from the beginning on more valuable in terms of the abstract value than what my colleague in the nail-sketching fiction, the nail art worker, did or said, you know, and we could go further and further, and then also it comes the exotization, and you know, I mean it's very complicated. But I hope that I somehow summarized. Yes.
I think I think it's also connected with this like institution of genius. That's also very much product of patriarchal society. And even in the 70s, Lucille Hart, who was one of the protagonists of one of the central protagonists of this new paradigm of art, somehow connected to the process of democratization, which is also the term that she introduced in art. System because of dematerialization, dematerialization of the art object as something that easily falls in the process of exchange of value with the capitalist system, and so on and so forth. So alienates also from its original context and blah, 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 how it goes in the entire art system. But Lucille Hart exactly wrote about this patriarchal figure of the genius, which is quite often applied to male artists, and the majority of also dematerializing the object conceptual artists were also male. So she wanted with this to actually emphasize the fact that the figure or the structure of the genius, quite often male artist, is served by a much wider circle of labor, which is the labor of quite often invisible organizer, producer, perhaps his wife was taking care about the kid who is maybe cleaning studio, and blah blah blah. Curator as well, who also quite often falls in these professions that are kind of less visible and serve to the pulling of the artist to the foreground or to the top. Okay, in the early 2000s, with the kind of boosting of the paradigm of curatorial, this changed a little bit, but in times of Lucille Hart, 60s and 70s, she quite often wrote about this like very gendered division of labor, and about actually much larger structure of labor, which is put in the service of production and reproduction of the figure of genius.
And in my current research project, which is dedicated to Yugoslav socialist illustrators for children, it is exactly this relation, how the social reproduction work that feminist subjects, these are women artists, of course need to perform, how these influences the materiality of their work. Like, you know, it's impossible if you need to take care of children as well to do graphic paper, and it will it will dry, you know, like when the kid comes and says, I'm hungry, feed me, for example. And then also in terms of how it is coded, how the reception is, it's only for children, it's applied art, it's kind of made back to back with the text, which is, so to say, original, and the illustration not, and then the whole omission of illustrators within the art history, you know, like even in Slovenia, which, you know, like there is this name of Ljubljana illustrator school, you know, like very little illustrators got art history attention by art historians, you know. I'm not an art historian, you know, so I'm more interested in basically these construction mechanisms of artists, female artistic authorship, and so forth. But yeah, it's
it's taken as a side activity within the entire paradigm of graphic art, which is very strong in Slovenia and very institutionally supported and very representative in both Yugoslav and international context, especially with the institution of graphic art biennial, which is organized in Moderna Galleria. This is one of the most important.
Međunarodni grafički centar.
Yeah, which is the most important, basically, mega exhibition taking place in our region, and since very early times it's organized the same year as Documenta, so 1955. So within this context, in the project that Katja currently works on, exploring the work of women's illustrators, she, I think, tries to shed some light to this a bit dark matter of this grand project, grand socialist project of graphic art, and also internalization of graphic art, and also, which is interesting in this institutional terms, that this exhibition of graphic in Slovenia was including a lot of artists from the so-called third world, which has its emancipatory side, but also its structurally, epistemologically problematic side. Any further questions, comments?
Thank you, Katja, for this really interesting insight in your work. I was not aware of all this project, particularly in the Nails project. I think we met last time in Berlin in this big project that Susan Husa was also involved in. And this was really interesting for me to hear from you about this interesting experiment, let's put it this way. I just want to share some few comments. It's not really a question, because I still try to digest all this information. One is that I really found it impressive, interesting, all this Marxist self-reflection on your project. It's not very often that curators self-criticize it. And it was not self-critique as much as it was revealing all this inner kind of discrepancies from the expectations of the project and the final outcomes. And this was not so much as far as I could understand, it wasn't so much curatorial failure, as you use it, I wouldn't even use this word, but it was our frustration, basically, because we do work within this kind of neoliberal context where, regardless of what are your aims and expectations, you still face the limitations of the system of production, the mode of production. And this is how I see why you came to these limits, because you could change the inner relations of production, the means of production, the use value or upset value, but you couldn't change the whole system of production. And this is unfortunately the reality of all of us. We would need to change the world and then, of course, the mode of production in our countries in order to produce projects as we would like to have. In that sense, I would say that it was really interesting and impressive, but I wouldn't worry because this is the same issue that we all face all the time.
This is exactly why I worry. I know.
Then we have to make a revolution. I'm sorry, we cannot solve this problem. I'm sorry to break it in this. It's really the limit of, what is much bigger than we can solve with one artistic or curatorial project. In that sense, I'm trying to be very realistic here, And then the other comment that I have is about the beauty industry. I see this as a kind of bigger inner problem of a feminist project that is dedicated to beauty industry, especially because as a feminist myself, I dedicated a lot of text and projects against the beauty industry as such. And this is the contradiction that I also think that you wouldn't be able to resolve. But of course, you are interested. This project is really focusing on something that is so invisible, is the labor beauty workers, and especially male beauty salons. But at the same time, the contradiction still exists. And the contradiction is this objectification of women, of course. So, regardless to our wishful thinking and trying to somehow improve the conditions within the beauty industry, my question is more radical, and maybe it's also wishful thinking. I would think about abolition of beauty industry. So, in that sense, this is my inner kind of discomfort with beauty industry in general, because it somehow contributes backwards, towards this self-objectification of women. So it's not about the relations of production or reproduction within the industry. It's the industry as such. Even if we improve, all these conditions, we still face the same kind of contradiction.
I think your comments are basically interconnected in terms that both problematics or both urgencies are kind of very overwhelming. So it's the whole system. Firstly, and secondly, it's the question of cosmetics and beauty work. I think, with choosing and dedicating to this very ambiguous material culture of cosmetics, which is in itself a tool of governance, as you said, and also of making a skill and so forth. Yeah. It's also a specific. I think performed a specific stand within feminism or with feminism in terms of for whom feminism is, and who is feminist, in a way, and I'm surely not promoting a kind of very normative, I mean there are normative also strands of feminism in terms of, you know, let's kill the old woman so the new woman could arise, which is yes, in a specific historic, which is revolutionary condition. I think in a condition like in which, you know, we are basically more or less the whole time perpetuating and reproducing the means of our own governance, like, you know, how we are governed, that, you know, to put such a huge normal expectation towards women, like don't use cosmetics, don't please your lover, don't be, no, just I don't think that you think so. I know, but I think this is interconnected, you know. I think that these kind of mechanisms within the expectations or political agenda which is projected on women, you know, in a ossified and very not changed context, you know, that a lot of times even puts women in a more precarious condition, like, you know, try not to kind of put out my mustache, for example, you know, like what would happen with me as a lecturer if I come with a mustache, you know?
Frida Kahlo.
And so forth, yeah? And who can afford this, you know?
More and
I
more.
want to add something. You know, my comment was on a single line with argumentation about porn industry and sex work. So I was not so much concerned about objectification of self-objectification of women as much as I was concerned with the industry that allows, that explodes this. So that was my comment.
Yeah, and this is, I think, very relevant. It is within some of the works of the platform. I was myself working right now on a paper in regard to Anna Ehrenstein's work, in which she employs the pornification in a way, in very ambiguous way, which opens a lot of the ground, you know, like, but maybe after the official discussion we can, it's also within the ethnographic research, found out that a lot of times women, through like exaggerated stylization, kind of gain power, which is taken off from them somewhere else. I mean, yeah.
Anyone else? I just have a few points, maybe. First, to thank you for sharing your work with us. One, I was just thinking whether or how much you could so far include Kosovo in your research, in your project. And because currently with your ongoing research, that's clearly part of it, and I was just thinking previously. The second, I mean, since I was just trying to check the date when the October Salon was, just to be correct, because I'm not following so much after since some time now. And if your collaboration since that time with the country researchers institutions, particularly in Serbia, have continued, how much the space where you work is shrinking, or is it increasing, or it's staying at the same level, because 2014 was a specific year, I think, in terms of institutions there, and the other can expand it more, and whether in this given context, if anything has changed, and also to reflect on your sense of urgency, which I completely understand. I think it is urgent in many aspects, not only in terms of clear definition of past layers and others. One last remark. I'm very much interested about 70s Croatia and everything that was going on at that time. You said something very quickly, and just I'm curious, maybe you could expand more. You said that the Academy of Arts was established in 1970s, let's say, in Kosovo. And the university was officially established in 1972, but it already started in the 60s. But I would not necessarily agree that art started at that time, because students were doing their studies elsewhere. So we didn't have higher education Albanian language, but the majority of our teachers were studying Belgrade, Ljubljana, Zagreb, and similar. And so there was activities even then, but in the 70s, Kosovo got a new constitution. Then these institutions were, I'm going to use the word allowed. And then you had higher education, which was, let's say, established as a systemic presence of increased autonomy with everything else that came. So just art was here already. So it's just in what level the National Gallery was established in the 70s as well. But there were other very interesting spaces, very interesting practices happening already, which sometimes we research and we find out. But just start.
Okay, so your first, so to say, sub question was in regard to my research upon the illustrators. Yes. So this is why I'm here, because it's because of the inaccessibility of the archives. So
Online accessibility.
Not only online, like the catalogs are very partially accessible, so even for publications like Pioneer, I cannot from remote check, like, you know, which animals, and so the archive is scattered. Also so what I'm going now to do is what I do anyway in the project is to meet practitioners within the publishing for minors that have experience also from the time of socialism, which I do anyway in terms of kind of getting a feeling on, you know, how the production situation was, you know. And then also in Relingia there was this Tuesdays, this insert for, so I'm looking there. I have found one illustrator, Afrodite Hoxha, but it's difficult to, yeah, we'll see if I'll manage somehow, maybe appoint some other researcher to make an interview with her. By now, from what I have also heard from colleagues, like in Macedonia, the situation was very similar. So when I approached the colleagues to kind of, you know, give me some hints, and so they said, no, there were none. And then in the end, you know, there were plenty, basically, you know, but it's online, one cannot find anything about them, you know, so it's not really archival work. Now, let's see, because I'm more interested, as I said, also in this relation between reproductive work and artistic work, and in the construction of maternity, childhood, fatherhood, and this patriarchal. So I hope I'll within my research provide also some useful material for the further researchers, because it's going to be all open access. What I will collect. Yeah. And get, of course, the rights for it. We live in a material world.
I can answer for
Okay, and for the October Salon, I guess really Jelena should answer. And then you said the urgency. What's the urgency bound to the October Salon question, or the urgency of the of feminism today?
Toward any critical practice, I would
Okay.
say, and including work of similar researchers for expanded space, but also to be more and more precise, because I think when you highlight the issue of feminisms, I think it relates very much also in this context, because it's very hard to expand the field and explore deeper the situation in this aspect.
Yeah, and I would say in terms of agency, I hope that I kind of put forward that as also Susanna's comment was, without changing this framework, everything is cosmetics, So it's only, at the end of the day,
I also think the role, of course, I think everyone should aim to change, right? So the aim is change, but even highlighting these conditions creates some possibilities to discuss how to change.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So highlighting, focusing on various aspects of this practice, and because what's the alternative? Then we just become part of the state.
And still, very important, this is what this critical self-reflection and critical reflection of the others, kind of peer activities, and also the relations within a certain community, and what is a community, and that certain non-compliance with this, with the rules of the game, and we all need to play the rules of the game, in a way, in order to survive, but still, always when it's possibility to break them, use it.
Yeah, okay, because we have a wider audience, so October Salon is one of the biggest contemporary art exhibitions in the region, which changed its shape and form many times, but it exists from, I don't know, end of 60s, beginning of 70s, something like that, and it had a first local character and orientation, and then from starting 2004, it became one of these big international exhibitions taking place annually. And actually, their situated practice with the word situated research, like being the art of Donna Haraway's epistemology, which was real, research, but also research with the thesis and research with the offering another perspective, another view, etc., etc. So basically, for me, the last October Salon in the contemporary institution of October Salon fell into the trap of routine with the exhibition by Nicola Schaffhausen and Vanessa, her surname starts with B, this October Salon had already shown some kind of routine where like international curators, big name arrives to the site and engages a little bit and also like very cosmetically with the context and with the local artist. But this is very cosmetic research, and I've written a critical text which is also based around the fact that in this exhibition have been exhibited works and photographs of contemporary date, which are absolutely the same as the photographs of the photographer, like a very interesting female photographer, Vesić, who made the same photos, the same scenes in 2003. So for the curator coming to the place and exhibiting local artists and not researching, not researching the exhibition history until the point that he allows himself to show the work, which is like a kind of the non-informated version of the previous artistic work. This is like really an exhibition without research. And the local curators and art historians have criticized like very openly this exhibition, again presenting them with this kind of like not really friendly to foreigners city, also partly because of this spirit of constant reveling and sometimes openness in the critique, which is quite often read by culturalized international world as a regress. So after that, the October Salon was sinking more into cultural industry, so that at the last October Salon, I do not remember the names of curators. So this is my recent strategy, that I don't want to remember all the names. Why should I remember, like all these names that are, like just floating on the stage and will disappear tomorrow and means nothing? Maybe I should use my memory to remember the names of some interesting people, which are many, like in history and present. So I also do not know the name of the current directors of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Belgrade. Why should I know it? Because like when she applied for the position of director, she had only Facebook and Instagram. Why should I know her? Why? I mean, so this is just the product, like copying the puppet figure. In the same sense, the October Salon, in the same sense of going towards like a very banal structure of industrialization of culture, but also going into the very banal culture of karaoke contemporary exhibitions. These two curators, some are from Italy, who are also running some kind of a magazine, used the structure and local money, which is also the money of taxpayers, like local taxpayers, for making the exhibition, where the major part of this money has been transferred to international galleries, because they even don't have very strong international connections and like international research, but also what they do is just to borrow the work from the gallery which represents artists, which are everyone. So this everyone who has money, and just the big problem is that this money was the money of the local serving taxpayers. So now, because all the institutions, like all the official institutions, in Serbia taken over by this we don't have to use like very sophisticated political terms. We can say by stupid people, but also like politically very problematic right-wing populists and their sympathizers and totally incompetent people and so on and so forth. We decided to revitalize one very traditionalist and unpopular organization, which is AICA, Associations of Art Critics, so that we, through this association, keep the voice of the profession, and especially the profession of curator and art historian, so to kind of disrupt this connection with manager-artist, which is very much structurally connected to the model of cultural industries and to the more wide process of deintellectualization. And then, I mean, I'm also like very much engaged personally in this process because I took this responsibility and this is voluntaristic work to be president of the organization. Okay, but we work collectively and we have like very complex system of governance with the two bodies like the program association and the body which is in charge for the programs of organization and the body which is in charge for the institutional operation, because it has to be registered as NGO, and it was in total chaos, so a lot of practical organizational labor is done in the meantime, but it is preserved as some kind of the voice of profession, which is, I think, a conservative thing to defend today. You know, like normally I would never ever in my life defend profession, but unfortunately we live in so banal and so dark times that, you know, like we now have to also protect some conservative values with facing incredible destruction of everything that makes sense. So now this year we managed to make, as an organization of ICA, we managed to make a collaboration with October Salon, which I think would be very helpful, with a program of like detailed exploring and archivization of the history of October Salon, and it is also made in collaboration with artists like Katja Kobolt, artists who often deals with the history, with art history, with the archives, with exhibition history. She's also working on that, but also a few of us, and we will have programs to look into the history of October Salon, into the history of connections of art criticism and this big exhibition, and into the also into the history of October Salon as a contemporary exhibition, with an attempt to find some positive examples, and definitely Red Market exhibition is one of them, and also the exhibition by Alenka Gregović Galerijat, which was an attempt to involve local organizations and institutions in the process, so to break this point also between the foreign curator and local artists and or international artists, but to delegate the money from definitely the biggest institution also in terms of money to the already existing local initiatives and their programs, such as, for example, this school would be, but okay, in different contexts. So I think this is going to be very useful for October Salon, and then other organizations, because our artists have also revitalized the old and conservative institution of Association of Artists, and they will work on more activist issues such as that they would like to change some things in the law that about the number of participation of local artists, about the compensation of local artists for their work, about the production and so on. And we will attempt also to change maybe this current very puppety and very stupid people board of October Salon with people who are both more competent and more wholeheartedly dedicated to the contemporary art and